So I used to do this segment called Fun with Russian State Media. And what I would do was I would show the news of the day, maybe 5 or 6 articles that would show you what was going on in Ukraine. And then I'd show you the reaction to it in Russian media, or I would show you just like what they're trying to project. And it's really interesting to see just what they're trying to message to the world. We're going to do that. We're not going to do the Western side. I do the Western side all the time. You can watch my 3 big stories where I encapsulate what's going on. Just go watch those daily. And then what we're going to look at here is how and what are the Russians trying to message? What are they trying to say? How are they trying to frame this so that you think the way that they want you to think? Okay, so we're going to look at Pravda, Tass, and RT articles. The first thing that you'll notice is the articles are not informational, they are persuasion. So the West wants to pull Putin's leg again. The West did not want Ukraine to win from the very beginning of the special military operation. Western media indulged themselves in discussing the topic of a stalemate situation in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. They want to amplify that message. They also want to constantly use special military operation as opposed to a war, and they want to push the narrative that the West did not want Ukraine to win. Now, that may or may not be true, and I don't think it is, but that's what they're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they'll do it in multiple ways. So, for example, Zelensky fears a second Maidan and what lies ahead for the Argentine post-election. So here in this article, they're trying to push the narrative that Zelensky's going to get pushed out, and they want to gin that up and stir the controversy between whether it's real or imagined between Zelensky and Zelensky. So here, Kremlin, Russia is not confronting Americans. Russia is confronting their ideology. Now, I understand that there's a difference between these two, but that's not even the real gem in this article. This article is where Peskov says, according to Peskov, Russia's next president should be, quote, the same as Vladimir Putin, or different but the same, unquote. And he says, quote, Putin has not announced his intention to run. Really? Like Putin's not going to be running, but I sincerely want to believe that he will do it. I have no doubt that he'll win the election. Well, neither does anyone else because it's going to be rigged. I have no doubt that he will continue to be our president. We'll see, Peskov said. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. Okay, next article in Pravda, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. The West wants Ukraine to mobilize women and the elderly. Look how bad the West is. They're forcing people to go to slaughter. They're forcing people to die. This is the kind of thing that you see again and again and again in Russian state media. Okay, so we know that we had a visit from the Secretary of Defense, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, yesterday in Kyiv. So the U.S. offers a sedative pill to collapsing Ukraine, says Moscow. Well, that's hardly neutral. It's showing, well, it's about to fall apart, and they're just offering this sedative. Washington has announced yet another military aid package for Ukraine worth around $100 million after Pentagon warned earlier this month that it was running critically low on funds for Kyiv. It's running out of funds. And very often the way that things are said is slanting what has actually been said in a light in which it looks like, well, we just can't support you anymore, or we don't have the money anymore, or we can't. No, it's just a matter of the political infighting within Congress. That's a normal, natural thing that they have to work through in order to get to the other side. Here's another one about the same thing. There's no silver bullet for Ukraine. Okay, silver bullet is a metaphor that, this is the one thing that will make it happen. And it's true, there is no silver bullet for Ukraine, but they make it sound like it's pointless or worthless. Now, I just want to highlight a little bit here. You've heard us say a number of times that there is no silver bullet for a conflict like this, Austin warned, whether it's F-16s or HIMARS and so on and so forth. And that's true, but the way that RT is going to frame it in the broad narrative of their story is that nothing's going to work. It's hopeless. Okay. Ukraine is utterly dependent on U.S. aid, Treasury Secretary says. Now, I'm highlighting. So Ukraine is utterly dependent on this aid. That's where they got the title from. But she also said all the rest of this. Yellen claimed that military aid to Ukraine was a critical priority for the U.S. national security. If Putin were to win this brutal war in Ukraine, next we might see an attack on a NATO ally of ours. We can't allow the Ukraine to lose the battle on the home front because it lacks enough money to keep school teachers in the classroom and first responders on the job when it's fighting valiantly on the battlefield. So Ukraine is utterly dependent on this aid. So that's the context in which that quote is lifted, but that becomes the headline, and it's kind of misleading when you just see the headline and don't actually read the article. And to their credit, they actually did quote quite a bit of what Yellen had to say, although they might twist other things in other articles or in other places. I got to give them credit for actually doing that, even though this is not the headline to what she had to say. Okay. EU politicians have Ukraine military psychosis, a member state. Okay, a significant part of the European political elite has practically lost common sense. Some people imagine themselves in Fortnite, said the Hungarian minister, whose name I can't pronounce here, at an event in Budapest. They suffer from military psychosis, and for some mysterious reasons, they believe that arms shipments can bring peace. This is another Russian narrative. You know, when you give them these weapons, you're only prolonging the pain. So capitulate now. That's what they really want you to do, is capitulate now. Don't give them weapons so that they can fight off the people that invaded their land, because that's just going to prolong the pain. You can't win. It's just going to make it worse. Common trope. Okay, Biden's rating is worse than ever, according to an NBC poll. Now, RT didn't make this up. I saw this on Fox News yesterday, and it was there. It's a legitimate poll. It's an NBC poll, not a Fox poll, and it shows that Biden was underwater in a head-to-head contest with Trump. Whether that will or won't be something going forward, we don't know, but they're going to make hay of it as much as they can. Okay, let's turn our attention to Tass for a little bit. Special operation continues. Russia keen to achieve goals, says a Kremlin spokesperson. Let's read this little gem. In response to journalist questions on how the Kremlin assessed the current situation in Ukraine 10 years after the Maidan unrest, he replied, quote, "We will call it Maidan, but in fact it was a coup d'etat by force, which was sponsored from abroad." Now that's something that the Russians maintain, although there's not really evidence that that's what it is. It was actually an overthrow of the Yanukovych government because he decided to back out of an EU deal and went with a Russian deal, and the people were unhappy, and one thing led to another, and people came into the Maidan Square. Yanukovych had his police fire on these people, and it just got out of hand. Okay, that was sponsored from abroad and has been directly and indirectly recognized by representatives of other countries. This is an open secret. Well, representatives of what other countries? Like North Korea and Belarus, and like who? This is, I don't believe this is what happened, but it is a standard Russian talking point. Okay, let's look at the other side of this. In response, you invaded Donbass with the little green men. So you'd never talk about how what Russia did was fomenting unrest and civil war within Ukraine. But this is a coup. But that's not. How about that you invaded Crimea and you had what had to have been a standing plan in order to invade Crimea and sweep in and do what you did in record time? That didn't just happen by accident. So you talk about this, but what about what you did? But that'll never make it into Tass or RT or Pravda. Putin points to UNHRC, this is the UN Human Rights Council's political bias in the Donbas conflict. Unfortunately, throughout the history of the conflict in the Donbas, remember when they invaded with little green men and fomented unrest that I was just talking about? And Novorossiya. Okay, what's that? That's the area that's roughly the size of Ukraine that Catherine the Great captured. Okay, international institutions. So notice how they're calling Novorossiya what is Ukraine. They're calling it something else. International institutions, which are supposed to guarantee and promote human rights, the UNHRC, the Council of Europe, and others, have demonstrated their biased position and inability to do their job. Yeah, they're biased against somebody who's being an aggressor toward a non-aggressor. I mean, that's correct. They should be biased that way. But it's being framed as if they're just against Russia. Okay, over 130 children suffer from Kiev regime's, okay, notice how they say Kiev regime, because regime sounds bad. Kiev regime's criminal hostilities, says an envoy. And what's he talking about? Well, he's talking about how over 130,000 children have directly or indirectly suffered from Kiev's criminal actions along the line of contact in Ukraine. Okay, let's say that there's something there. And they're talking about how education facilities, over 2,000, have been shelled by Ukrainian forces. That sounds high, and that sounds not true to me. But what he's overlooking is that more than 19,000 children have been documented to be taken by Russia. Now, this is CBS News, so it's a legitimate news source. And they worry that the actual number of children that have been abducted, no, they're talking about children who have been directly or indirectly affected in some way. Maybe their school building has been damaged or something along those lines. 130,000. But there's probably upwards of 300,000 Ukrainian children that have been stolen by Russians and displaced into Russia in this brutal full-scale war. But they're talking about what? Okay, anyway. Next, Russia is to create Intervision Song Contest for the multipolar world. Okay, the multipolar world is what Russia wants. They don't want a unipolar world, is what they call it, where it's led by the United States, but they want more like what the U.S. Soviet Union kind of was, where and maybe China and maybe somebody else, so that the U.S. isn't kind of like the only superpower left. They want to kind of they say they want to balance it. What they want to do is they're envious of success in the West, and they want to have their own. They want to be respected too. Well, this might not be the best way to get the respect that they're looking for, but the multipolar world, they're going to have a song contest glorifying the multipolar world and how wonderful that is. And it just smacks of the old Soviet days, singing songs to the glories of the Soviet Union. Okay, Putin, this is an older one. This is a December 2022, but I just had to pull it out. Putin, I still think of Ukrainians as a brotherly nation. What is happening now is not our fault. So he wants to maintain that kind of thing, and he said that here. But this is just a bunch of talking points as he and Shogu were having a conversation, a scripted conversation, that just provides all these convenient talking points about what was going on within the war in Ukraine. Okay. That's a quick run through of the kinds of things that you're going to see when you look at Russian state media. So that's why I did these segments on fun with Russian state media, but I just thought it would be interesting to just see just today. And so these articles, except for the last one, were all like today and yesterday. That's what Russia's trying to project, and there's a reason that they're trying to project it. Okay, tell me what you think. What helped you? What grabbed your attention? Put it in the comments below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Thank you for the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.